Sharyl, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Great to be here. Thanks, Sean.
So I got to get your take on how these riots in LA are being covered.
Get down!
Oh, he got
Because the last several years plus have not been good for media trust. And you've worked, at a place like CBS. You've been around. You obviously have the show now, very successful. When you see the coverage the way it is now, where they continue after everything that we've seen, the Russia hoax, we're going to get into a lot of the healthcare stuff that we dealt with COVID. But just, I can't believe that folks in the media don't at some point say, all right, we've got to be a little bit more straight. And I keep hearing about peaceful protests. We're watching cars get burned. We're watching reporters' stuff get burned and smashed. And yet, there's no sense of shame.
Well, my industry, as you know, has changed dramatically in the course of the last 20 years. I like to say, as I've written, that any form of communication that can be co-opted by propagandists has been, and that, of course, includes the news media, which has undergone this radical transformation. So I think you have people reporting who are no longer, if they ever were, I think we used to do a pretty good job at being neutral observers of facts and things like that. And that's just not the case anymore at many news organizations. I think reporters are rewarded for taking a particular viewpoint. When I left CBS ahead of my contract, part of that was because many of us felt like, not just me, we were being told to take a certain viewpoint in a story ahead of even gathering the facts or even researching the story. And when the facts didn't come out the way certain supervisors wanted them to come out, they either wanted you to change the story in a way that was dishonest sometimes, or they didn't want to air the story at all if you insisted on being factually accurate. So I know there's got to be an element of that going on at news organizations.
And it's funny because that actually was exactly what I was going to ask you next. So if you're a reporter out there and you're writing about mostly peaceful protests, is that because you, the reporter, do you think, believes in that narrative? Or do you think that you're either pleasing your boss at headquarters or corporate, or are they telling you to do that?
Well, it could be either one. Certainly, reporters are being dictated to, in some instances, how they should term things as if it's the responsible thing to do. Be sure and point out, mostly peaceful, or they may be told that from certain supervisors in New York, for example, and they don't really have a choice if that's the direction they've been given, unless they want to quit or just simply say, as I try to do occasionally, that's not factually accurate. You try to make your case. But then you're likely to be pulled from the story if somebody really wants a particular narrative out and you're not going to fulfill it. So that's the problem with today's news coverage.
There was this clip that I played earlier in the week. I want to play it for you from an ABC News affiliate about what was happening there. And I want to just show it to you and get you to react. Take a look.
Large group of people. It could turn very volatile if you move law enforcement in there in the wrong way and turn what is just a bunch of people having fun watching cars burn into a massive confrontation and altercation between officers and demonstrators.
Now, Sharyl, I don't know you well enough to know exactly what you do for fun. But I don't know a ton of people who go out for fun to watch cars burn in public. So I was shocked by that narrative, the idea that they were saying, aside from people watching cars burn for fun.
I don't even understand that. It sounds like it was a live shot, and maybe he regretted what he said pretty quickly after he said it, or maybe someone told him later how crazy that sounded, because I don't think even, whatever side you're on these issues, I don't think that makes any sense.
No. The other there's a couple big stories in the media, and before I get to sort of big pharma and healthcare that I want to get you to weigh in on. Obviously, the big one this week that didn't get as much coverage as it probably should have is Terry Moran had started off the week over at ABC News going on a 12:06 Saturday night AM Twitter storm on Stephen Miller, talking about that he eats hate and such. What I found fascinating about the story, though, is ABC said nothing. They literally said nothing all week. To this day, have not actually put out a statement or a tweet from ABC PR. They commented on Elon Musk's, the tweets that he put out. But how does a network like ABC get away with not even having to comment? Because what I found fascinating is it's not just that they didn't put anything out, but you would think that other media outlets would be calling them saying, do you have a comment on Terry Moran and what he said and whether it adheres to ABC News standards? And yet here we are 7 days later almost, and nada.
Well, I've been traveling, so I'm not up to date on all the latest news, but I think they did put out a statement and they said that they basically fired him or decided not to renew.
Oh, no, what? Yeah, but they didn't put out a statement. Brian Stelter from CNN said that this is what's happening. It wasn't, he sort of has a background source at ABC. So you have a quote, media personality at CNN talking about what's happening, but ABC never issued an actual statement or anything. Brian Stelter at CNN says what ABC is going to do, which I think is a pretty weaselly way of handling it.
Well, that is interesting. And, I noticed one thing when I tried to read a little more of the coverage about that, because a lot of news anchors and reporters have made similar statements, if not worse, with impunity in recent years. So I wondered what made ABC decide to take action. And if this is accurate, what I read, they already had let his contract lapse and had not renewed him. They said that, in what I read, this basically tipped the scale. They decided not to renew him, but his contract had already lapsed. That's unusual in our industry. If they're going to keep you, they don't let your contract completely lapse. And it makes me wonder if Terry Moran didn't try to go out in a blaze of glory if he sensed that he was not going to be renewed at ABC. And, certainly his profile raises to some degree if he's looking at a book or another job, if he makes a stink over something like he did, which just didn't make a lot of sense why he did that.
It's almost like he's going full Acosta.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that next week he announces he's going to be on Substack. He's going to have his own podcast and he's going to be the real guy. I mean, kind of like it was like he was pretending to be a journalist for decades. And now he's going to say, I can finally be the authentic Terry Moran, kind of like how Jim Acosta's going out there on his own. I love the theory because I think that's interesting. But Stephen Miller had initially responded to Terry Moran and basically said that, this was typical of what most journalists think. And then Chuck Todd came after him and said, it's so sad that this administration has no interest to try to bring the country together. They intentionally create division is how you win short term and lose long term. A patriotic, they're basically saying, hey, this isn't actually what Chuck Todd's answer was. Don't try to group us all into what Terry Moran did. It's an isolated incident. And Stephen Miller's basically like, no, you're all the same. He just said the quiet part out loud. Do you think that that Stephen had a point that this isn't just Terry Moran? He just got caught at 12:06 a.m., probably after a couple pops, saying what he believes. And Chuck got very defensive, thinking, well, it's just a one-off. Most of us aren't like this.
Well, the attack saying that most of us aren't like this was itself sort of in the same vein as the original accusation, wasn't it? And I think we have plenty of evidence that many in the media do feel that way because some of them have made no secret of it. And as I said, have expressed these things with impunity. I'll even go a step further and say we've seen, as I tracked in recent years, so much misreporting and factual errors on one side against Donald Trump and those who support him. And yet those reporters, there was a time, I would say 15 years ago, when you made major media mistakes like that you'd lose your job. And instead, reporters like Maggie Haberman at the New York Times and others, when they prove to be conflicted or biased or wrong with their anonymous sources, are continue to be promoted and given headline status. So I think this is more than just a one-off with Terry Moran. I think we know that this is something that's grown pretty pervasive in the mainstream media.
The other big media story this week is the Associated Press was ruled against by the courts. Currently now the White House can keep them from being in the Oval Office or Air Force One, but they have to be allowed into the big rooms, the East Room, et cetera. From your journalistic background, Is the White House on the right side of this, or is the AP?
Well, I'm mixed on this issue because obviously, as a journalist, I really tread lightly in thinking the government should do anything that limits journalists in any way. And if I'm correct on this, and Sean, you may know more, the fight the White House picked with AP was AP refusing to say Gulf of America, when in fact, I think there are many more substantive and important things to take beefs with over at AP, which has become, practically wholly owned by propagandists and those on the left in the pharmaceutical industry and so on. I'm not sure that was the fight to pick over naming, whether they're going to use a certain name for the Gulf of America. So I'm a little mixed on that. I do think we've put the administration and Donald Trump in particular in the position with so much misreporting and false reporting and bias that he's in the position of feeling as though if he doesn't do something, there's nobody neutral who's going to stand up and do the right thing. So he's taking actions, and I covered this on my show Full Measure, that appear to be clamping down on a free press. But even Frank Sesno, an analyst at George Washington University I interviewed, said, to the extent that this makes some in the media more careful about the mistakes they've made when Donald Trump is actually coming after them and winning some awards and settlements, that can be a good thing. If it goes too far and makes journalists chilled and fearful of doing accurate reporting on somebody, obviously that's not something I want to see.
Well, first of all, I love your show, Full Measure. It's so like you the topics that you hit and the way that you cover them. It's so missing in the environment, in the media landscape. And I love how you choose topics and then how you cover them. So when you look at a story like this, what would be an example of clamping down on the First Amendment or on the press?
Well, there's a question as to whether if reporters begin to feel as though they have to curry favor with the administration in order to get ordinary access. Now, Donald Trump is so accessible, it's hard to argue that you're not getting access if you're kept out of a room. But in general, if reporters start to feel as though they curry favor to get access and that must be done or else you and your news organization will be cut off from ordinary and routine access, that's something that could be an unintended side effect or consequence of going after the media, understandably, for the things that they've done wrong. So I guess I don't have a simple answer as to where I stand on all these issues, but
No, and I think it's a fair point. But I would argue that if you think about what Biden did by restricting conservative media and shutting out certain outlets versus, say, Trump, to your point, I mean, think about how accessible he is, how many of those reporters are, at the Marine One or in the Oval Office. I mean, you look at the daily pool report, you've got the Huffington Post. I would argue that if you think about Trump, he's more transparent, more accessible than any president in history, whereas Biden did more to restrict press access writ large and against one ideological side.
absolutely. I think you can't argue against the notion that Trump is the most accessible president that we've known, certainly in my time. And so it makes it harder, I think, for AP to make the case that, boy, if we are limited in certain ways, the public suffers and we don't have access, because there is so much access on a daily basis with this president and his administration.
Yeah. All right. Before I get into some of the pharma, healthcare, MAHA stuff, there was a hearing this week that I didn't hear a word about until I saw you give light to it. And it was a hearing that James Comer had in the Oversight Committee that I literally, until I saw Sharyl Attkisson post about it, I was like, I didn't know about this. And it was about 23andMe and potential privacy concerns. And you wrote in your newsletter, he stressed that 23andMe and all companies handling genetic data must ensure that there is no legal path for adversaries or hostile entities to exploit Americans' DNA. The committee, he said, will consider legislative solutions. And I think to myself, like in the military right now, you are not supposed to use 23andMe because the idea is we don't want our adversaries to have critical data on service members. And I was like, this is a big, big deal. And I think the question to me is, explain why you think that this is so important for us to understand.
Well, I have to dig into this more. We've covered this issue a bit on my TV show, how China has gotten access, its foot in the door to so much that may seem benign, but ultimately they're gathering grains of rice in their efforts, that span 100 years to collect intelligence and to try to become dominant in so many ways. But I think the answer as to why you don't see many in the media picking up on what to the people is an obviously big and important story is this transformation I've spoken about in the media, where it used to be that we didn't wait for someone to tell us what the story is. We didn't wait for propagandists or, let's say, websites and nonprofits and political figures to tell us what the marching orders are for the day. We went out, at least I did as an investigative reporter, and I still do. I listen to people. I try to find great issues that matter to people. And I'm not taking my cues from what these organized forces would like us to report. But I can tell you, many news organizations and many TV shows do exactly that. If this is not going to, for whatever reason, 23andMe or some other story, serve a particular interest in the right way, and they're not going to put it on the plate of those they contact in the news media every day, it's just not going to make it into a position of prominence. So I think those are super important stories. And one of the most valuable things we can do is find those stories and still try to report them in a good and accurate way, especially these stories that mean these health stories, as you mentioned, that mean so much to so many people and impact so many people, but aren't getting the due coverage because they're not being put on the plate of the media every day as part of the daily diet.
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.